My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. It is the foundation of both Judaism and Christianity. It is the first book of the Old Testament, and it's called Genesis. Chapter 1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Chapter 26 says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness." There are similar stories and creation myths in virtually every faith and ancient culture. If each has their own version, then the question arises, which one is correct? Or are they all correct? Which leads to the biggest question, who was the creator or creators? The prefix exo derives from the Greek meaning out of, away from, outer, external, outside, or exterior. There are those who say there is evidence to suggest that humankind was created by extraterrestrial life forms. If this can be proven, it would suggest that Genesis was actually exogenesis. Joining me this week to present this possibility are Bruce and Daniella Fenton. Bruce R. Fenton is an independent scientific researcher currently exploring alien technosignatures, genomic SETI, panspermia, and human origins. His archaeological research activities have been featured in UK's Telegraph and Guardian newspapers and Science Channel's Unexplained Files. Bruce is the science feature editor for the hugely popular Earth Ancients podcast and is a regular guest expert on History Channel's Ancient Aliens. His previous books include The Forgotten Exodus, the Into Africa Theory of Human Evolution, which includes a foreword written by the internationally best-selling author Graham Hancock. Bruce is a current member of both the Paleoanthropology Society and the Scientific and Medical Network. Daniella Fenton is a highly regarded professional intuitive and initiate of an ancient shamanistic Ecuadorian ancestral healing lineage, having spent many years training in Andean shamanism while living in Ecuador. Daniella has had her research into human hybrids and related topics featured in major media in the UK, US, and as far-flung as Argentina. Daniella is a popular guest on many radio shows, and her work has been featured in several books and magazines. Their website is hybridhumans.net, and they join me this week to discuss their brand new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, a Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Bruce and Daniella Fenton.
Thank you so much for inviting us on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Bruce and Daniella, it's customary when we welcome guests to Destination Unlimited for the first time that we ask them to share their paths and how they came to do the work that they are doing. So who shall go first?
I'll start. I'll give Daniela a moment to gather her thoughts. For me, really, if I look back in terms of being interested in, let's say, unexplained phenomena, ancient mysteries, and all of that good stuff, my first real encounter with it was via my grandmother on my father's side. Because we used to visit her on a Sunday, and she would sometimes give me these little collectible cards that would come free with her boxes of tea leaves. And one set of these happened to be on unexplained mysteries of the world. And if I remember right, I think it was 40 different cards. And each one, would have a picture on one side, something like the Great Pyramid or crystal skulls, yetis, ghosts, all of these things. And then on the other side, it'd have a little bit of text about the mystery and, a key case and sort of, some more details where you could look into it. And so through that, collecting these cards gradually, I became introduced to quite a wide range of strange phenomena and began to become, I guess, quite, fascinated with it. And so that was around, let me think, about 11 years old or 12 years old. So you could say my encounter with the mysterious was fairly early in life, but didn't become, more serious until my late teen years, early 20s, when I started to read more in depth. Obviously as an 11-year-old, you won't do an awful lot of deep study, but certainly, that's where it began for me. And then from that, I also had my own experiences that began in my later teens with psychical phenomena, incidences of telepathy, strange visionary experiences, and a more direct, living the strangeness, if you like, rather than just reading it. So it was a bit of a combination of both, information and experience.
Wonderful. Daniela?
I have a few overlaps with Bruce. Mine started, well, as far as I can remember, when I was very, very young. I must have been still a toddler when I started having weird experiences. As I grew up, these experiences just became more and more enhanced, and I thought that they were quite normal and that everybody would experience things that I was experiencing. I used to speak to my parents about it. They discouraged it. They told me not to talk about certain things. So I sort of like swept it away from me, but it kept coming back to find me. I just remember being able to see and hear and feel from a very young age. Also having a few contact experiences, probably from around the age of between 1 and 2 years old. And then as a teenager, I was always interested in, the unexplained, I guess, and anything I couldn't look up, I would always try to tap into in an energetic way. From about 17 onwards, I started doing readings, and this also blended in with mediumship and more sort of just strange phenomena. My life has always been filled with phenomena, and so then after that, it really kicked off when I came into contact with Bruce in my 30s, physically, even though we had known each other since about 2005 and we were still in our 20s. But Bruce and I have got those overlaps that it's something that's always sort of like come looking for us and has found us.
Do you consider yourselves to be soulmates?
Yeah, I would say
definitely.
We first discovered about the twin flame topic back in about 2013, I think, and sort of recognised an awful lot of the information as applying to us, particularly in terms of and you might be familiar with this, but the commonality that when twin flames, people that seem to be almost a split soul, encounter each other, often, if that relationship works out, and most of the time it doesn't, if you look at the cases, that when it does, usually there is some kind of profound mission or task that those two have to perform. And so we also recognize that element of our relationship, that, that's kind of why we're on your show, is because we are dealing with a fairly profound mission, and so that is also part of our story.
I share that with you. My wife and I are twin flame, and as you mentioned, the twin flame relationship can be the greatest relationship and also the most difficult relationship until that resurrection of the soul together takes place. So thank you for sharing that. That's wonderful to hear. Alan J. Hynek referred to them as close encounters, and he labeled the various types of close encounters of the first kind, the second kind, the third kind, the fourth kind, and more recently the term the fifth kind. Daniela, you alluded to the fact that you had an encounter. Bruce, have you had any?
I've had different kinds. I've seen anomalous objects, in the sky, the kind of UFO, and I would say in energetic kind of form, lights, and also what I assume is a structured craft. But I've also had, sort of encounters with consciousnesses of non-humans, in some cases through Daniela, to be honest, where she's had, a consciousness step into her and have a conversation with me, and that being a non-human presence. So, yeah, I've had both types in that respect.
And Daniela, do you have any further to discuss?
I remember from about the age of about 1 and a bit, having an experience of being sort of like targeted by a form of, I describe it as a Chewbacca, because it was a hairy being, trying to get at me in my bedroom, and me trying to sort of get away from it, having experiences of astral travel through this experience, and then later being followed by craft while I was with my father. My father then told me that this had happened to him throughout his childhood and as an adult, and that this was something that, he didn't like, he couldn't explain, but then it sort of clicked in my mind that, it was something that had been happening through his part of the family. And then later on, when I came into contact with Bruce, just having time slips that blended in with contact due to the beings that I was encountering on the other side of that time slip. And the initial time slip, the first one that ever happened, I was taken into a dome type shape craft with no floor, no ceiling. You could see right through it. And there were beings from another place. And that was the first of a series of very difficult encounters that I believe were a consciousness type, but also felt very real because physical things would happen to me on that side that I would bring back with me into this reality, and it would happen while I was sleeping. So there was...
Yeah, we'll further discuss this a little bit later on in the interview. But do you consider yourself to be a channel for extraterrestrial intelligence?
I would say somewhat, in a very strange way. Yeah.
Because there have been incidences where you were, like I say, I've spoken to a consciousness through Daniela, but usually you're not. It's not a common thing that you're channeling extraterrestrial consciousness. Not like someone who does that on a regular basis and supplies information.
No.
Usually it's spirits, isn't it? Like deceased people that you'd usually channel.
Definitely. It's because of my work as a medium, then I would be working with spirits, but it's a very different energy. It's a much stronger energy when I compare it. So, yeah.
You had mentioned that your father had admitted to you that you had lineage of that experience. Did he tell you how far back that went?
I suspect, from what I know, probably his mother had it, and then he had it, and he had several encounters. Probably about 3 or 4, quite big ones, and then other things that had happened to him that I would recognize as similar to the time slips that I've had from 2012 onwards. So I think it's my father's side of the family, but I don't know how far back it would go. But I do suspect it probably goes further because he often used to talk about, from his mother's side, strange things that used to happen with the women. So I'm suspecting probably at least 3 or 4 generations.
Absolutely. My guests, Bruce and Daniella Fenton, were talking about their new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. We'll be back with more of Bruce and Daniella after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living, a chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
A social distancing tip.
Keeping your distance from others is important in slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are some fun things to do alone. Read a book, take a walk, unpack your suitcase from that trip you took last September, paint a self-portrait, catch up on a TV series, do a puzzle. Remember, we should all stay home to lower the risk for everyone. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this week, Bruce and Daniella Fenton. They're the authors of Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. Bruce, Graham Hancock said about your book, Forgotten Exodus, The Into Africa Theory of Human Evolution. The Forgotten Exodus is a timely, thought-provoking, and extremely useful book by Bruce Fenton. And while it is not the only or even the first book to propose an out-of-Australia evolutionary origin for anatomically modern humans, it is by far the best. Indeed, it is the potential, although I cannot promise this potential will be fulfilled, to rewrite history. Coming from Graham, that's an awesome, awesome review. Please share with our listeners about that book and what inspired you to research and write it.
Absolutely, yeah. I was, as you can imagine, quite stoked to have, someone of his caliber say that about the book. So, yeah, that was quite astonishing. And to actually have him write the foreword, was quite astonishing. The book, that came about through it's a series of kind of some coincidences and some strange happenings. But Daniela and I were in Ecuador from early 2012 for about 5 years or so. But soon after we arrived, we got to know a couple that were doing sort of shamanic healing and were involved in that kind of work. And we'd made an arrangement to meet them for a chat. And they asked, would it be okay if another couple, joined the conversation, because they had to meet them the same day, and it would have just saved them some hassle to have everyone together at once. And so we were like, okay, that's fine. And the other couple, they started talking about this recent expedition that the chap had been on into the jungle, where him and some friends had kind of explored a megalithic site, a really mysterious megalithic site. And he was talking about it being a lost city of giants, and that they'd found giant hammers and really strange artifacts. And this is out in an area called the Untitled, which is if anyone might know it, they might know it from the legends of the lost Inca treasures of Atahualpa, because supposedly half of the treasure of the Incas was taken into the Yanguinatis jungle and hidden somewhere out there in the swamps or caves. So in that same area, there is this peculiar megalith. Now, I became sort of involved with research, and keep in mind as well that if you have all the people for this guy to end up sitting at a table with, I'm probably the only English-speaking kind of researcher of ancient mysteries for hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers, right? So it was extraordinary in itself, and I've only been in the country for a couple of weeks. But from that, I became a bit involved with researching this, and then over the next year or so, I came to understand that there was a connection to a very ancient population in the Americas called the Lagoa Santa, whose major sites are down in Brazil. So, of course, in that was a mystery. I was thinking, why are these ancient Brazilians up in Ecuador in this jungle and, with this mysterious site? And the Lagoa Santa, they have the morphology, essentially the body structure of Aboriginal Australians, right? So now you start getting to another set of mysteries. Why are there Aboriginal Australians in very early America? And how does that fit with the out of Africa story and the way that the Clovis people populated the Americas? And I came to the conclusion that it just didn't really fit. And so this is what led to a very deep dive into the conventional story of the recent out of Africa event for the populating of Eurasia, America, and Australia. Now, there's a lot to it, of course, but what it turned out is that when we first had this model formulated back in sort of the 70s and 80s, really, there was a transition to a popular consensus over an African Eve and an African origin for the Eurasian people. There was very limited evidence of modern humans beyond Africa, right? There wasn't particularly any. All of the fossil sites were in sort of East Africa. The genetics really was only just at a very early stage. In fact, the early 80s, we had the first mitochondrial DNA studies, which is where the famous kind of African Eve papers arose from. But the evidence was actually thin on the ground in general. But you find that today that this is a very changed situation. You now have evidence of modern humans long before sort of 60,000 years ago that are down in not only in Southeast Asia, Australian sites, 65,000 years old in the north. You've got sites in East Asia and China, particularly with modern human fossils that go back 80,000 to 160,000 now. So, I mean, really, the narrative has changed a great deal. And through the sort of extensive research that I did that goes into that book, I propose an argument that what we really are seeing is a repopulating of the Eurasian continent from Australia around 60,000 to, very close to 60,000 years ago. And that, in fact, it's not the first populating of Eurasia, that there has been a sort of cataclysm, if you like, that's eradicated modern humans, and that they are remaining south of the equator, both in Africa and in Australasia, until the climate shifts again, and there is a repopulating event which begins in Australia, not in Africa. So this is fairly it's quite revolutionary, and as sort of Graham points out, it would change the understanding of human history, but first it has to be known, and that's where he understands, because this kind of information gets suppressed. It doesn't get talked about in the mainstream media, and indeed I had a Forbes article that was published about this work, and it was spiked by unknown senior people at Forbes within hours, which is really unprecedented.
Why do you think they do that?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons. You know, I was very frustrated for a couple of years with what I saw with the media sort of ignoring requests to cover the information. I contacted a lot of journalists, a lot of scientists. And what I eventually came to understand is that when it comes to a paradigm change, that it's not really about having the strongest information. And this is something, if people look into Thomas Kuhn's work on the paradigm shift cycle, he points out that if you have two different paradigms that are in competition, that it's very hard for anyone in those separate worldviews, if you like, to actually talk directly to each other, that they tend to talk past each other because each one is so sure of themselves. But also he said the other problems are that people are invested in their paradigm. So they may have made a career out of the information. They may have, their standing in the community may depend on the information. They may have finances that are tied up into that paradigm. So they then have a vested interest in not, looking at your evidence. So it's very complex. He said it's often a paradigm change is rarely about just having the best evidence. And that, to be honest, was kind of a relief for me to understand, because I wasn't really seeing why it was that it was so taboo for major media to even look at this. And then it became, a bit more clear that, we were dealing with vested interests and political narratives, that it just does not suit to have this story shifted across to Australia and the Aboriginal people. So, yeah, it's a fairly complex backstory to why paradigms don't change in the way most of us assume.
It's about not rocking the boat, especially if that boat was Noah's Ark, right?
Yes. When these things are absolutely, these are core sacred cows, things like the recent out of Africa theory, and of course the evolution of humans, creation of humans, all of these things, they're really core sacred cows for a lot of people.
Which leads us to a couple of more questions. Now, from the traditional scientific standpoint, how did life arrive on Earth?
From the traditional standpoint, at the moment, the greater consensus view is that we had a case of abiogenesis, that life emerged out of geological and chemical processes in the early period after Earth's formation, and that there is an unknown pathway for this to occur. Some suspect that it involves comets impacting and then bringing some of the basic chemical building blocks for life, some of these organic compounds. But the truth is, it's a speculation, and nobody knows if that's actually true, because we have conversely some smaller, like you say, less popular theories that are also speculative, but nobody has, come up with evidence would say we definitely know it's abiogenesis.
Now, traditional anthropological theory is that Homo sapiens evolved from apes and chimpanzees in particular. What's wrong with that premise? Well,
if we go back to I agree with the basic ideas within the evolutionary story that, that if we look at the genetic evidence, all life on this planet seems to trace back to a common ancestor around about 4.5 billion years ago. So if we look at just DNA and we look at the evidence for, common shared ancestry, that we have come from them. Now, there's differences, in my opinion, on how that evolution happens, but I don't disregard that. So I would say we do share a common ancestor with chimpanzees and orangutans and all the rest, that we have a common ancestor millions of years ago. They went off their way, we went off our way. Again, no one knows for sure what that common ancestor looked like. And then this is another key point. For example, it's assumed usually that we had a chimp-like ancestor for chimpanzees and humans. But as some more honest scientists have pointed out, it could be a human-like ancestor, and that it split, and that one line became more chimp-like, right? So we have to be careful with these kind of assumptions that it must have been a chimp-like creature, because it could have been a human-like creature, right? And in fact, if you look at how the chimpanzee walks, so it's quite unusual, because there's this knuckle walking. It looks more like a bipedal creature that has regressed towards quadrupedic movement. It doesn't have four legs, it has sort of 2 arms and 2 legs, and it just walks in this strange way on its front feet. So it may be that it was once, its ancestors were bipedal, more like us, right? So this is a sort of something I found very interesting as I was digging into this, that a lot of these assumptions in that narrative are really open to, a lot of questioning.
And there's a lot of difference in the genome between the chimpanzee, the apes, and the humans.
there's a lot of fundamental differences, a surprising number. And indeed, when we do the contrasting of the genome, you find that there's an enormous number of differences that are concentrated on regions that are to do with the brain in particular, but also unique human anatomy, such as, where you have ability to use our fingers and thumbs in a particular way that they can't, and other aspects of our anatomy that, are important to what we consider being modern human, abilities, that's where we find the concentration of anomalies, which is in itself quite peculiar. It's not random differences.
Planet of the Apes was obviously science fiction, but perhaps not far off.
Perhaps not so far off.
That's wonderful. My guests this week, Bruce and Daniella Fenton, the author of the new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. Please share with our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this fascinating work.
Absolutely, yeah. The book will be available through, it should be any good bookstores. If you walk in and ask for it, if they don't have it on the shelves, they will definitely be able to get hold of it for you. And of course, you can request that they do please put it on the shelves. It's always appreciated. Also on Amazon and Borders and anywhere online that you can normally get your books, you should be able to order it there. We will have a few copies. So if you want signed copies, we will have a few here. But of course, you've got that on postage from the UK, so just be aware of that. There's also a short documentary that we're making about the book content, and that's in collaboration with Skeptico, and that should be out in early June. So if you keep an eye on my websites, brucefenton.info, ancientnews.net, and hybridhumans.net, there'll be some updates on there, as well as articles of interest, possibly.
And we'll be back with more of Bruce and Daniella and Exogenesis after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
This is OTR-FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
During these times of worry, fear, and uncertainty, a calming and soothing voice may help you relax, clear your mind, and help you sleep. This is Victor the Voice Fuhrman, and for the first time, I'm offering my voice for your well-being. I will craft a personal guided meditation to suit your needs. My fees are very reasonable, and I can provide your personalized guided meditation quickly. For more information, please send an email to voice@victorthevoice.com. That's voice@victorthevoice.com. Blessings, my friend.
Hi, this is Bill Maher. I can find humor in almost anything, but one thing I never laugh about is cruelty to animals. If you don't get the joke either, write People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, 501 Front Street, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this week, Bruce and Daniella Fenton. We're talking about their new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. In the introduction to Exogenesis, you say that your work is based upon 30 years of research and a lifelong relationship with what you call the phenomenon. What's the phenomenon?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a bit of a bundled together sort of term for all the psychic phenomena, telepathy, mediumship, remote viewing, psychometry. There's so many of these sort of psychic skills that people demonstrate that I've had experiences with most. Daniella's had experience with most. On top of that, time slips, astral travel, contact with consciousness beyond human beings. So really, I'm bundling there an awful lot of different types of phenomena under one word, really, just for the sake of not having to, put that entire list there of each individual experience. But those, both of us have had, experiences go back into childhood. In Daniela's case, as she mentioned, right back to the cot. In mine, I would say that, at early childhood, I certainly had some very powerful dreams, which today people would say were, sounded like alien abduction type experiences. Now, I'm not saying that I was physically taken, but certainly I had dreams that mesh with the claims of alien abduction. And those must be when I was about, I guess that's probably about 7, 8 sort of age. So we've both had experiences that have gone on from early in life that connect to what we could call the phenomena and, strange aspects of human consciousness that have carried on all the way through to now, with us being in our early 40s. So it's been, a lot in the synchronicities, the other guiding signposts along the way that we've been nudged towards strange events, the seemingly organized path behind this, whether that's, higher powers directing or some other aspect of how reality functions. So we've sort of bundling that all into one. But I've also been researching these topics from, in a more serious level, I suppose, from my late teens, as I sort of touched on a little bit earlier. So yeah, it's been a long time of involvement both with the research and the experiences.
Daniela, do you think that most people, especially when they're children and have not been told to conform to a different set of thoughts or ideas, that most people experience some form of this phenomenon?
I do. I do believe that we all experience it. The problem is that either we forget it or we hide it or we're told to switch it off. Because adults, when we grow, we tend not to dwell so much in that frequency, and we obviously, as we transition from babies to toddlers to children to then adolescents and adults, we go through different stages of development, and I think also psychic development. And I think from the birth process, from when we're born up until we're about probably 4 or 5 years old, is when we have very strong connection to, other dimensions. And then we start to lose it, one, because of, social aspects like schooling and, being interactive with other people that then start to influence our thought process and our spirituality. But I strongly believe that everybody has this. And the thing is that when, people that don't normally talk about it or that you wouldn't think have had things happen to them are the ones that are more likely to tell you, well, I remember an event when I was like 5 or 3 or 2. So, I do believe that everybody's got it, and that at some point some continue with it and it gets stronger, and then other people tend to switch it off. But yeah, I definitely believe it's there for everyone.
There's a wonderful story in certain traditions that when a baby is born, an angel comes, takes its finger and presses the upper lip, and that's why we have that indent. And what they're actually doing is saying, "Shh, don't tell them what you know. Don't tell them what you know."
Yeah, I could believe that. Definitely.
In your book, you say extraterrestrial contact is not an isolated event. It is a continuum. Please explain.
Yeah, I think we both kind of feel that that's the case, that it's not that we are now entering a period today where there is contact. If we look at the way the ufology sort of circles work, there's a tendency for people to say, well, look, the last 70 years there's been evidence of a presence, an extraterrestrial, interdimensional, non-human consciousness that is interacting, whether with ships or abductions and all of this stuff that's tied into the topic. But I would say that it's not just the last 70 years. It's certainly not just today, but it goes back much further. And that if you look at the phenomena associated with alien contact, that you'll find that in older records. Even if we look into things like the fairy folk stories, the idea of alien, abductions by some other, that goes back much earlier. Contact with other intelligences through shamanism and other belief systems, that goes back a very long period. In fact, shamanism is shown to go back perhaps around at least 70,000 years, with some evidence in both down in Australasia and also in Africa. We've evidence of ritual and spiritual practices going back that far. So if we really think about it, that contact to me is now thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. It may well have been going back before the 70,000 years, but we just, we don't have a clear record because, of course, we have a problem with how far back direct information can go. Like beyond that point, you could only really access, I guess, psychical information. You might think of channeling that information, but in terms of acceptable evidence, writings, or oral traditions, then we still have tens of thousands of years of information that suggests this contact is by no means just a modern phenomenon.
My personal spin on something, I don't like the term abduction, and I've never shared this on this venue before, but I have shared it with friends. I've had experiences since I was very young, as far back as I can remember, 2-3 years old. And when I was a little bit older, in my 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I recalled that these experiences for me were what I referred to as night school. And the reason I call them night school is when I would come back, I'd seem to have knowledge that I had no other source for. Have either of you had that type of experience?
Did you when you were younger? Did you have anything like that?
I just remember see, the thing is, I can't put it down to being taken away and being taught things, but I just remember being shown things and not knowing where that information came from. That's the way I can put it. And it's something that I even have, even in my psychic work, where I can be doing a reading for someone, for example, and suddenly I have a moment where, I'm probably not even here. I gather information from somewhere, or it's given to me, and then I come back and I relay it to the person I'm reading for. But, as being a child, I remember sort of having access to information, and I don't think I can compare it now to the psychic work, but I can sort of say that I was given information from somewhere. But because of the nature of things that I experienced when I was very young with beings that I couldn't really explain, where they came from, I can put it down to sort of being taught things by other entities, I
guess the question I'm asking is, did you consider that you were taken against your will, or this is something that you were meant to do?
No, I'm not. Mine was difficult because what I said when I was younger, I would still classify as intense dreams, because I have no evidence that I was physically removed from my room, so that's why I can say that they mesh with what ufologists would call an alien abduction experience, but I don't necessarily claim that I've had an alien, abduction experience, because to me, I would look back and think probably it was an intense dream, because I have nothing to really suggest that I physically left my room. So that then if I wasn't, and also I don't even know if my consciousness left. I don't really know with that, especially as a child. That's hard to look back and know what that really was. So that could have been something metaphysical.
Absolutely.
Or it may not have been, but I can't say I've personally had, what you might call an aggressive or an invasive kind of abduction experience where that's happened to me. Maybe Daniela, some of your out of body kind of experiences you might put into that?
Going back as being in that cot type experiences that I remember going on for quite a long time, just having the knowledge that Chewbacca type being, I remember the feeling of, if it gets to me, I'm in trouble. So sort of trying to flee from it. And then, going back again to talk about a little bit about the time slips that I've had in 2012, those were more, I guess, a feeling of being taken, because I physically did feel that I had left the room, even though Bruce can contest that, my body was still in the room. But I did remember going through a barrier and being pulled apart cell by cell, and they're being reconstructed on the other side. So it was an incredibly painful experience for me every time it happened, and very exhausting. And the other thing is that when that used to happen, if I had altercations with beings on the other side, I would have things that I would bring back with me, like bruises and scratches, and I had a couple of black eyes when I would wake up. And, if I was given something on the other side, so to wipe my mind, which I was given on a couple of occasions, I would be throwing up from what I remember being over there. And then Bruce pushing me and the bed away from the wall because I was being sick, but I was unconscious. So, It's hard. It's borderline. It's sort of like those really felt like abduction in a way, physically, more than sort of just mentally and emotionally.
We're going to talk a lot about Ecuador when we come back. We have about a minute left in this segment. But Ecuador was really the breakthrough point for a lot of the work that you've done on exogenesis. Basically, before we have about a minute left, what happened in Ecuador?
Essentially, we arrived there in January 2012, having come from Spain. About 2 weeks into being there, there was an evening where we'd literally been sitting downstairs and we'd had like one bottle of wine, so it wasn't heavy drinking, we shared a bottle of wine. And then we went up to go to bed, and Daniela was feeling quite unwell. She started feeling, really unwell, which didn't mesh with having had 2 glasses of wine. Felt very unwell. So she went to bed and then was quite clearly in pain and discomfort. After about half an hour, she kind of fell asleep. I guess, when you feel like in pain or fever, sometimes you pass out. So it was more like that, as it looked like to me. So she eventually went out of it. And then probably within another half an hour, I noticed that she began kind of mumbling and talking in her sleep and was kind of moving around. Sometimes she would kick the wall and stuff. And it was a very disturbed kind of sleep. And then, so from my perspective, that's what I saw. But as Daniela was touching on a moment ago, from her perspective, it was like leaving her body and passing through a barrier, through a wall. So yeah, it depends on, from the physical point of view, what I saw.
And we're going to pick up on this in the next segment. My guests are Bruce and Daniella Fenton. We're talking about their new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. We'll be back after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
The student asks the teacher, "How do I experience transformation?" The teacher replies, "When the student is ready to receive deeper answers, the student then asks, 'How do I know what deeper questions to ask?' And the teacher replies, "When the student decides to commit to a practice inviting transformation, level 2 questions will be revealed." Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, and as a teacher and host, I'm inviting listeners to enroll in the mastery of transformation by joining me on Decide to Transform, your bridge to level 2 answers. Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guests this week, Bruce and Daniella Fenton. We're talking about their new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. So before I interrupted you in the last segment, because we were running out of time, you were alluding to a story of what happened. You two had shared a bottle of wine. This was Ecuador. Back to the room, and Daniela was complaining of not feeling well, and while she was sleeping, she began basically channeling something.
Yeah, so from my perspective, she seemed to be having a conversation where I could hear one half, of course, only her half of the conversation. So it was clear that there was her replying to someone else's questions or statements. But a lot of it was quite strange. She was talking about things like there being 3 suns, and that there would be groups of people working together, and what sounded like quite a strange, esoteric conversation. With some of the topics felt kind of familiar from, I guess, like Hopi prophecy and Mayan prophecy, things that I'd read myself, because I study quite widely into esoteric topics. So there was elements of that seemed kind of familiar. So I was listening quite carefully. I made notes of most of what I could hear. And then in the morning, when she came back around, I just asked her if she'd had any kind of dreams or, a strange experience. I was a bit cautious. I didn't want to sort of, make her go along with anything that maybe she didn't remember. So I just asked, did she remember having any dreams or anything strange happen in the night? And that's when she kind of filled in the blanks a bit and explained to me what had happened from her side, which I'll let her explain for herself.
Yeah, as I said before, I was taken into I appeared somehow in a dome, and it was a teal colour on the outside, but it was very dark. And I remember looking down, and I was in this meeting and looking at my feet, and I could see I was on, like, in the sky somewhere. I wasn't on Earth anymore, and I was quite like, oh, this must be a dream. Oh, this is really strange. I've never had a dream like this before. But the feeling was really eerie, because there were beings there that were talking about problems that were happening on Earth and things that were coming up and things that had happened in the past and things that happened in the future, and they all looked really strange. There were some really, like, human-looking ones, and then there were ones that didn't look like humans, and then there were some really tall ones. And the really tall ones that were sort of like hybrid-like, they seemed very familiar to me. And I just remember this feeling of like, oh, heck, I don't feel like I'm dreaming. I don't feel like it's a lucid dream of any type either, because I don't have very lucid dreams. And it was just a really, really odd experience. And then being fed a lot of information, like I felt like I was downloading, but I was in a lot of pain. I remember being in a very uncomfortable sort of like physical position, and then coming back from that in the morning and Bruce sort of like asking me, what had happened. And then me telling him, and they're sort of thinking, okay, something strange has begun, something strange has happened, and I felt different in the morning. And then I started having my time slips, which are just the icing on the cake, really.
Months and months.
No. Yeah, they went on for a year and a half. From that point on, I would have like a time slip probably 3 or 4 times a week, and it would always happen when I would fall asleep, and sometimes I'd be asleep for hours, and then they would just begin, and I was taken back, and it wasn't to this craft or dome-shaped place. It was to 7th century Palenque in Mexico, and there was a hybrid program going on, and there were beings from different places in this city, working in laboratories underground and being some of them were part of the society, but there were different species there, and it was harrowing. So like a year and a half of having this involuntary, I guess, time slip, which was incredibly painful, and then your personality changing as a person as a result of it. So
now all of this led to the discovery of an artifact. What was that?
Well, that's where this story connected into another one, really, which was that because of having published information about these experiences, we came into contact with a pair of Australian researchers called Stephen and Evan Strong, and we ended up collaborating on a book, Ancient Aliens in Australia, which tackled an involvement of extraterrestrials, particularly some associated with the Pleiades, which they had also had information connecting to this kind of interaction. And so a funny thing from that was that we ended up connecting to a lady called Valerie Barrow through this Australian team. She's also Australian, and she has a book called Taringa, When the First Ancestors Were Created. Now, it's in there that we find out about an artifact, an Aboriginal sacred artifact called a Taringa, which she came into contact with back in the early 1990s. And this artifact had a consciousness of its own and was able to communicate directly with her, and revealed that it was a star person's consciousness, inhabiting this object, and that it wanted to reveal a lost history of humanity and a creation event for us that involved an extraterrestrial visitation to this planet. And so it was really from the information that she published in her book, which came out in 2003, that I used that as a roadmap to explore and find out if this could have been a real event, with objective physical evidence supporting it, and found that, yes, indeed there was.
Were advanced alien civilizations looking for a planet like Earth to use as a petri dish? And if so, why?
Yeah, that seems to be the case. I mean, the information in there involves a story of that, the Earth itself was seeded, that it was, a planet that was targeted to have DNA, put on it, and almost, grown on it, if you like, if you were to think of planets as farms or something. But, that it was not a natural abiogenesis event, that life was seeded here, and that is something that happens out there in the cosmos, that is not the only place that's been seeded with life. The why, particularly of why it was done like that, I'm not sure that I have an exact answer why that was done. But it does seem that, the contention is that there are beings that seed life into space, for a start. And if we look at the evidence for that, it's quite intriguing, because you find that Earth's story, life begins about 4.5 billion years ago. And that's all the evidence. The fossil evidence and the genetic evidence suggest 4.5 billion years ago. The planet is 4.6 billion years old, right? So it's almost as though as soon as the crust forms, things begin to cool, life appears. Now, that's kind of extraordinary, because if it was a random, slow, chemical, geological event, it's always been thought that it'd probably be, a billion years or something before life eventually emerged. But now what we find is that no, it was astonishingly fast, which meshes very well with the idea that either it's been deliberately seeded or that life, rained down from above and was already there. So it's quite intriguing to see how the science is meshing with the kind of information coming from these extraterrestrial consciousness that are claiming this was a seeded world.
Do you feel that they're currently intervening?
Yes, I do. I think this is an ongoing process. And I would say that all through evolutionary history that they've been involved, that when we see things like the Cambrian explosion, where life suddenly multiplies to create all kinds of new organisms that don't have any obvious evolutionary ancestors, they just appeared in the fossil record, that what you're seeing there is new information coming into the system. Now, where does new information come into a system from? It has to come from outside. Because, information can't just appear out of a stone. You might say that, if you argue that the same as life did, you can't just say suddenly loads of new information appears causing all these organisms to appear. It doesn't make sense from that kind of slow evolutionary perspective. And again, if you look at various organisms, you can find there's these sudden jumps. Again, at 200,000 years ago, there's a sudden jump where the mitochondrial, they're called DNA barcodes, suggest that there was an event which changed. I think it's about 70% of animals on the planet have a sort of leap around that period. So we get these sort of punctuated equilibrium events, and I suggest that these are to do with ongoing shepherding of life on this planet, where humans only have the most extreme evidence of modification and manipulation. But that doesn't mean that other animals and plants and everything else has been ignored. And I think that this occurs partly through a raining down of modified retroviruses, which then infect organisms on the planet, and they deposit new information. And in fact, we find this evidence for what they call retrovirus carcasses in the genomes of most life forms, and that this is a way that you can transfer information. And I think this is what they've been doing, because it's an easy way to do it. If you rain this stuff, if you put it into the upper atmosphere and it rains down, and it affects target organisms, you can modify them in that way. So you don't need to land and individually work on each creature. And although that could happen too, that as a general rule, I think a lot of this has been done from just raining information down on us.
Are we on the verge of a paradigm shift? Is the long-awaited disclosure about to take place?
I think we are, but I don't think it's going to come in the way that most people feel, that that suddenly we're going to get one of these deep state projects, some lifelong secret keeper is going to come out of the darkness and say, that's it, look here in my bunker, here's the alien ship we captured. And I know that a lot of people are hoping that will happen, or even expecting that will happen. But the only way that could occur, I think, is through it being that there's so much information has already come to us via the visitors themselves, that there's no longer a basis for those secrets to be kept. So I think disclosure is coming, but it's coming, and the communion, if you like, that they have with contactees here on the planet, and the information is being brought to us to ready us for a more intense and more direct level of interaction. So I think we're in that very far into that process now, and we are going around the secret keepers.
What would you like readers to take away from Exogenesis?
I think, firstly, that we are related to an extraterrestrial presence, that we have a direct genetic relationship to them, so as to not be scared and frightened by the idea of an interaction with them. Now, I'm not going to say that all intelligences out there in the universe have to all be friendly, or they're all related to us, but that we know there's at least some star family out there, and Native Americans are calling their star family. And I think that we understand that will ready us in a way that nothing else could, to understand that you have family out there, and those that, have an interest in you, that we're not going into the blind unknown, that they do know us already. And I hope people will sort of take that away. And also the unity of humanity, that we are all, tracing back to this common ancestry. It's not that some people have been modified and some haven't, or anyone's more special than the other, that we all have a common ancestry back to the original upgrading, if you like, of a primitive ancestor to create the Homo sapiens, and that we all have that star ancestry.
Daniela, anything you'd like to add?
I just think that we all have to come together and be more open, as Bruce said, to this information to help us then step into, I guess, the next phase or the next cycle that we're coming into, because there's going to be a lot of changes and we have to be prepared and we have to be open-minded and obviously, not be afraid and embrace the gifts that we have, because we all have them in one way or another, whether we recognize it or not. It will help us complete this cycle and then get into the next cycle, which will obviously be much better.
And hopefully reunite or bring unity to humankind, compassion, and the foundational message found in virtually every faith: love thy neighbor as thyself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If we can live that message, then everything is worthwhile. My guests, Bruce and Daniella Fenton, the authors of the new book, Exogenesis, Human Hybrids, A Scientific History of Extraterrestrial Genetic Manipulation. One more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
Okay, if listeners would like to find us, they can go to brucefenton.info for my personal work. Also ancientnews.net for some of my archaeological articles, hybridhumans.net for some of the more space stuff. Of course, Amazon, Borders, all the big bookstores, you should be able to get hold of the book through, and signed copies would only be available direct from us. And I'll let Daniela say her website and contact information.
My website is daniellafenton.com, and the email address there is daniela@daniellafenton.com, all lowercase. For readings, shamanic work, mediumship, and counseling.
And thank you both so very much for joining us and sharing this wonderful work that you're both doing and life-changing work that you're both doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.